we, we were, I'm following you on Twitter and looking at the stuff that you're writing. If I had told you at the start of the year that you'd be writing a full length feature on Elliott Brown, I guess what would have
Love
gone
it.
through your
I've been
mind? Like,
happy.
how would you have been like, what happened here today?
I
Like,
mean, at least
how did that story come to be?
I would have wondered for sure if I was writing about him because he was playing. And if that was the case, it would have been somewhat eyebrow raising, even with all the injuries that Nebraska's had at wide receiver. Elliott Brown hasn't been somebody who's been on the field, but he's made an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And it came about because after the Purdue game, Matt Rule was asked about Marcus Satterfield going upstairs to the press box to call plays from that vantage point. And he said, we've got Elliott Brown on the sidelines and he's the cheat code. And my ears perked up when I heard that because it just sounded interesting. And Rule has a tendency to do that where he drops these things in, like on Monday when he just dropped in the middle of an answer about Minnesota and Michigan State that one of the teams they played scouted them. And it's like, well, yeah, we know that, but like most coaches haven't just brought it up on their own. And he did. So that was worthy of a follow-up. And the same thing with this Elliott Brown stuff. It's like, okay, what do you mean he's a cheat code? So I asked about it and then was able to talk to Elliott for an extended period of time. And I know his dad, Lance, know him, like I covered him. We're same age. And
right.
So I was in school with Lance and was a student writing about him on those great 90s teams. And Lance was a character. I mean, like one of the most colorful, like flamboyant players who played at Nebraska. And Elliott's got that personality, but it manifests in such a different way. And I was aware of his social media following. Like he's a TikTok star, or was, he's put that aside, but he was this TikTok star and a YouTuber and, has hundreds of thousands of followers. I mean, people knew about him for things that went way beyond football when he got to the program in 2020. And Elliott, as Elliott was open to talking about whatever. And, he said that did not sit well with the guys when he walked into the locker room. But once they figured out who he was, he just kind of put his head down. And once they figured out who he was, he won them over. And, that's gone to the next year where because Garrett McGuire and Marcus Satterfield are upstairs, Elliott Brown has taken on the role of coaching the wide receivers on the field. And sometimes Garrett will say, hey, give Malachi or Jalen or Jaden Doss or Alex Bullock, give one of those guys the headset and he'll speak directly to them. But most of the time it's Elliott as the mouthpiece, as the voice for Garrett McGuire, who's upstairs diagnosing defenses. And he's getting things lined up and he's signaling in plays. I mean, he's sacrificed whatever opportunity he had to play, as a backup to put on this headset and be a coach. And, Satterfield said he's like Pete Rose. He's a player coach. And, maybe not the greatest analogy with Pete Rose, but whatever. I mean,
he was a really good player.
He was a player and coach. And
he's not playing for Iowa with that analogy.
He doesn't have all the qualities of Pete Rose, but just some. And and the crazy thing is, and then Elliott, right after this happens, or a few weeks after it happens, and he takes on this new role, he tore his ACL in practice last week. So he found something for himself that may end up being his future, and then he got hurt. They still put him on the travel roster last week to Michigan State, one of those coveted 74 spots. He went and took one of those spots 3 days after he tore his ACL. And then he went into Garrett McGuire on Sunday back in Lincoln and said, hey, should I delay this surgery so I can be on the sideline for the last 3 games? And Nebraska coaches said, absolutely not. Take care of yourself. You need to get this surgery so you can start rehabbing. He has 2 years of eligibility left. And, we'll see how he uses them. Maybe he'll come out and fight for a spot in the receiver rotation, or, maybe he'll keep that headset and go into coaching, or, we'll see. But really interesting player, really interesting person on this Nebraska roster for all kinds of reasons that have not that much to do with what he's done on the field.
Mitch, as I was reading your article or your story about Elliott, I couldn't help but make a correlation. Tell me if it's a stretch here or if I'm kind of on the right track. Of a lot of the things we heard about Garrett McGuire when he was hired by Matt Rule sounded really similar in my mind to what we were hearing Garrett McGuire talk about Elliott Brown. Did you make that connection as well, or am I stretching a little bit there?
Yeah, they really hit it off, and they talked for the first time on the phone last year. Garrett hit the ground running at Nebraska, and he just got hired off that Carolina Panthers staff as a 23-year-old wide receivers coach. And, he started talking to Nebraska players on the phone before he set foot in Lincoln. And Elliott's one of the guys that he talked to. And, Elliott said, I had no preconceived notion. People gave him that benefit of the doubt and didn't have preconceived notions about him when he came to Nebraska with this reputation as an influencer instead of a football player. So, he pays that forward and didn't have that kind of, took that approach with McGuire, who's 23 years old, and people have questions about him. What kind of assistant coach is he going to be? Is he ready to come into the Big Ten and be a full-time assistant? And, that allowed their relationship to start on a great note. And when they got together in person and Nebraska coaches started to see the work ethic that Elliott showed through the offseason. I mean, his dad says that the workouts in the winter and like the mat drills and spring practice, that stuff, Elliott loves that more than he does the game day environment. And, in part because he's not playing meaningful reps on Saturdays. He's played in 2 games this year, played in a couple games or 1 game maybe in 2021, but savors the whole experience. And yeah, I mean, that's what Garrett McGuire was like at Baylor as a backup quarterback for Matt Rule. And, his dad, of course, Joey, Garrett's dad, Joey, was on that staff and is now the head coach at Texas Tech. And, Garrett's just see with the Nebraska offense this year. I mean, he is on the fast track in coaching. And it takes one kind with Garrett McGuire to understand who you're talking to and what kind of a future he has in this business. It remains to be seen if that's even the route that Elliott Brown chooses to take. He might go into business like his dad, but coaching is there for him as a possibility now when he didn't really look at it that way until he connected with Garrett McGuire and started to learn, about Garrett and how Garrett went about his business. And these coaches at Nebraska have really opened up a new side, not just in Elliott Brown, but I think in a lot of players on this roster, for them to be able to understand things about themselves and how maybe they can help their team or help whatever the people who are around them in their lives more than they recognized before these guys took over in Lincoln.
Mitch, I want to get your thoughts on one other thing before we get into the matchup this week and some other things surrounding the program. We were talking this morning about Michigan, and so we'll do a little Mitch on Michigan, maybe Michigan. Can I make that?
Yes.
Can I make
there
that?
We go. Make a new segment out of that. I mean, we talk about Michigan. I talk about Michigan every day. So,
So Mitch, I'm curious. I want to know your thoughts on Michigan's response to the Big Ten on the scandal, and if you think it's just a ploy to prolong punishment so that it doesn't have effect on the outcome of this season.
Yeah, it's like, look over. Hey guys, look over here. Look over here. Over here. Don't look at what we're doing. Rutgers and Ohio State and Purdue, they're trading stories about our. That's a different crime. And two wrongs don't make a right anyway. So it's not like just because other Rutgers wasn't sending, Ohio State wasn't sending coaches or staffers into the seats at other games. So, I hear the argument that it's still advanced scouting, but those people who were doing this advanced scouting for, against Michigan, they were supposed to be at those games. They were there with a job to do. And just because they then go and talk with each other about what Michigan does, I mean, that's not really something that's easy. None of this is easy to police, but that's way down deep in the gray area. No, and that never would have come out. Michigan's never going to bring that up. Other teams could bring that up too. I'm sure Nebraska, in its day as a feared program, had plenty of opponents in the Big 8 and the Big 12 who talked about the Huskers behind their back, whether it was about signals or 10, whatever it might be. These coaches are all friends. I mean, I've been to the conventions that they go to in the off season, and they stand there for hours and talk with each other in the hallway. Well, what do you think they're talking about? I mean, how do you beat Michigan? How do you Michigan's at the top. How do you get over on them? And if that's about, look, when they do this, you can expect a run play or you can expect a whatever, those conversations have nothing to do with Michigan's scheme that it concocted this elaborate scandal that they're deep into to steal video and match it up with game film. I mean, it's what they are accused of doing, is way beyond the gray area. It's a big time violation of the sportsmanship clause that exists for the Big Ten, and then in addition, rules that govern college football at the NCAA level. So they can continue to try to get people to look in a different direction, and I think that's what they're doing this week. But in the end, I don't know that it's going to make much of a difference in what the Big Ten decides and ultimately what the NCAA decides. But clearly, I think the concern on the part of everyone who's not wearing the maize and blue is that Jim Harbaugh is going to be long gone when Michigan gets served with its punishment, and they're going to have gotten away with whatever they get away with this season in 2023, however far they go, without him having to pay the price. And obviously, others in the Big Ten and around the country aren't too happy about that.
We're talking with Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, as we kind of turn our attention to Nebraska and their upcoming game against Maryland, obviously the quarterback position is going to be one of the most highly watched of the week, as it always is. I thought Coach Rule said something really interesting in his, I can't remember if it was his post-game presser or if it was his Monday presser, but he talked about how not everybody wants to be in the positions that Heinrich Haarberg wants to be in. Did you take that as, because I guess, how did you take that? Well, let's start there. How did you take that comment from Rule? Because I thought it was really interesting that he singled out the fact that Haarberg kind of craves that pressure.
It was hard for my mind not to go right to the other guys at that spot, and
Yep.
for me to wonder if that's truly the separator for Heinrich Haarberg, and just that he's a better teammate. And I think Jeff Sims is a good teammate. Don't get me wrong. He has been there and has been supportive, and I've heard not one word this season about him, being a problem in the locker room or on the sidelines since he was benched. He was injured for sure at first in the Colorado game, but he's healthy now and is on the bench. So he's handled it about as well as you could from that standpoint. But Haarberg has done other things to make him a good teammate beyond just not being a problem. I mean, none of these guys are problems. They have good guys at the QB spot. But I think what Rule sees with Haarberg is that he's got a competitive fire that, and this is my interpretation of that answer, that they're not seeing from everybody else at that position. That he's the one who truly wants to be out there. I think in the mind of these coaches, they have questions about how badly the other guys want to do it and what would happen if you put them into a game and a bad situation comes up. They wonder about how the other options at QB would respond. What they know with Haarberg is that he's going to get back up and he's going to go back in that game and he's going to clear his mind and he's going to try as hard as he can to do everything for the team. And that does take a unique player. I mean, we've seen it over many years at Nebraska that players are asked to perform in difficult situations, hard circumstances, when seasons are, when you're playing out the string, when it's not going the way you want. And there have been plenty of guys who have lost some of their edge in that moment. They see the opposite with Haarberg. They see somebody who wants it as badly as the guy who wants it the most on the roster. And that's a great attribute to have in your starting quarterback. And it makes it really difficult to go away from him when you have questions, I think, about what the other options at the position can bring you. Nobody else has proven they can do it. So it's not like you've got an alternative to some of these struggles that Nebraska's had, where it's just sitting out there and you say, well, if we put this guy in, we know what we're going to get. You don't know what you're going to get from the others.
So Mitch, are you someone, just based off that answer, and maybe, we can just assume that your response would be, it's not very long, or it is very long, I should say. But in terms of talking about the leash on Heinrich Haarberg, if mistakes and inconsistency keeps up, are you somebody that thinks that his leash is actually pretty long and it's not very short?
I think it's pretty long. It's not never ending. There could be a moment where they just feel like they've got to go with a different look. Not to say that you're benching him forever, but maybe a situation arises where the turnovers get even worse. Where you just feel like there's no rhythm or flow with the offense. Maybe Chuba Purdy shows something in practice that you haven't seen a couple months of the season. And I know they say that he's been good and they like what he does and he's a great athlete, but I think they're looking for something out. They're looking for something more. Before they haven't put him in. So that's a fact that we know. He hasn't been in a game. So what needs to happen in order for him to get in the game? I don't think it's just the quarterback who's out there has to play worse. He's got to show them something else that they're not seeing from him. So we don't know if maybe that moment happened this week in practice. And if it did, and then you see some struggles from Haarberg, okay, maybe there's a spot where you put Purdy in there. But I'm going into these last 3 games expecting that as long as Haarberg is healthy and short of just a complete disaster on the offensive side, he's going to be the guy. And I know there's people probably listening to me right now saying, what do you think last Saturday was? Well, it wasn't a complete disaster. I mean, it was 20-17 with 5 or 6 minutes left in that game. And he had just led them on a drive when it looked like Nebraska was down and out, down 2 scores in the fourth quarter. He's the one who had the 40-plus yard run that put them down at the goal line. And yeah, he made mistakes throughout and the interceptions that he threw and some of the passes that he threw that didn't go down as interceptions were just, really, really difficult to understand and I think to swallow as a Nebraska coach or a Nebraska fan. But they had an opportunity to win at the end. And that's what Matt Rule wants. He wants these games to go into the fourth quarter, and he believes that he's building a program and putting together a team with the kind of resolve that they're going to win those games in the fourth quarter. We haven't seen it with great consistency yet, although, at Illinois, they did that. Against Purdue, they staved off a late charge by the Boilermakers. So there's, hindsight's 2020, but I think they felt pretty decent about Nebraska's opportunity to pull another one of those things out on Saturday in East Lansing, despite how ugly it looked.
Mitch, just a couple minutes left here. How do you balance, if you're Marcus Satterfield, the things that he sees on tape and in games where he's like, hey, these plays will work, and then we see receivers getting open and the concept of the play working versus the struggles of Heinrich Haarberg to execute that? As you kind of like you put yourself in his shoes as you continue to call plays, how do you balance that? Because it's really frustrating to just see incomplete pass after incomplete pass. But if the guys are open, I mean, do you still keep calling those plays?
You have to. I mean, you can't just give up on the pass game. You have to go with what you know, and really, with as much time as Heinrich has now had in the system as the quarterback, you're talking about 7 games. You have enough on tape from games that I think you have to use that and put more faith and value in what he's done in games than you do with what you see in practice. But physically, it's important to know what he's capable of. And if you're not seeing it in games or in practices, then I think you have to take that out of your arsenal as a play caller. If you know he can do it, you think, you believe in him, you believe he can do it, you're working on him with the cerebral aspect of it. They talked this week, Satterfield did, about Haarberg clearing his mind and playing free. And, he's working with, their sports psychology people to try to get himself in a place on the field on Saturday, where he's able to maximize his abilities. I think it's a good sign that Haarberg is open to that stuff, that he's not just, that he's actually willing to work with them to try to best in himself. It's a balance for sure that Satterfield faces in looking at the results on the field on Saturday and understanding what he can do based on practice. But I think you still have to take risks. You still have to try to push the envelope. If it leads to mistakes, you can live with it. If it's a mistake that's made out of aggression, and that's similar to what Tony White's dealing with on the defensive side. They want to be aggressive. They want to take risks. And I think you're going to see You're not going to see that change over the last 3 games. If anything, you're going to see Nebraska maybe up the level with which it chooses to take some risks, and because it knows that's what gives it the best shot to win.
Mitch, quickly here, 30 seconds. Both teams are 5-4. Both desperately need a win to be bowl eligible. For it to be Nebraska, they need to do what better than Maryland on Saturday?
Okay, good. I'm glad you didn't ask me for a prediction because I don't have one. They have to limit the turnovers and play well on special teams, and I'm going to write about that for Friday. I mean, those are the 2 things where they really fell back against Michigan State in comparison to the previous 3 games that they won. Got to do better on punt returns and in all aspects of special teams this week, and you can't lose the turnover margin 3-0. Like, if you got to be even or better than Maryland in this.
I'll be looking forward
Mitch
to
Sherman
that story
from The Athletic. Mitch, we appreciate your time as always.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mitch.